Very good morning to all of you. In today's class, we will discuss about sales and agreement to sales, or the difference between sales and agreement to sales. In previous class, we have discussed about contract of sales, elements of contract of sales, sales and agreement to sales, etc. As you know, the sales happen in the time, but agreement to sales are the sales happens in future. So let us check out what are the basic differences between sales and agreement to sales. So if you look at the slide, it is very clearly explained about sales and agreement to sales. Number one, in case of sales, the goods are transferred immediately. But in case of agreement to sales, the goods will be transferred in future, because there is only an agreement. They are not transferring the goods on the time, on the spot. Number two, in case, suppose, if the goods lost, who is responsible is a question. The answer is, in case of a sales, it is vested with the buyer. Because, for example, if you buy a car and you lost the goods, who is responsible? It's you. But in case of agreement to sales, because the goods are not transferred to the buyer, the seller has not transferred the goods to the buyer. It is in the hands of the seller as of now. So, in case of the loss of goods to the buyer, it is the responsibility of the seller itself. Number three, in case of default from the part of the buyer, the seller can sue for the price. Suppose if the buyer make default in payment of price, the seller can file a case against the buyer. But as in case of agreement to sales, there is only an agreement to transfer the goods. So the seller can sue only for the damages. So what is the difference between damages and price? The price is the full amount of whatever the amount is. For example, the price of a car is 1 crore rupees. Then the Audi car with 1 crore rupees, he can claim, the seller can claim 1 crore rupees. But in case of agreement to sales, there is only a contract, and the buyer has not paid the price and not received the goods also. That is why the seller can sue only for the compensation for the losses happens due to the breach of contract. Now, sales are the executed contract. It is over. This contract between the buyer and seller is over, and the goods are transferred. That is why the seller can, the sales is an executed contract. But in case of agreement to sales, it is executory contract. The contract will be executed in future. That is why it is just an executory contract. Next, if seller make default in delivery, the buyer may sue for the delivery, because as the sales, the buyer has already bought the goods and he paid the goods. And if the seller make default in delivery of the goods to the buyer, he can file a case for delivery. But in case of agreement to sell, the seller make default in delivery of the goods. The buyer cannot file a case for delivery of the goods, but only for damages, compensation or damages, as we have said in the previous case also. Then, when the goods destroyed, the buyer should bear the losses. In case of a sales, the buyer should bear the losses, sure. But in case of agreement to sales, the seller should bear the losses. Number 7, when the buyer becomes insolvent, the seller should transfer the goods to the official receiver and can claim only the price due. In case of a sales, say the sales contract happened, and at the time of delivery of goods to the buyer become insolvent. Suppose goods are transferred today, price paid yesterday, and goods are transferring today. And in today, this the buyer became insolvent in the court. Then these goods must be transferred to the official receiver. The court will appoint a person called official receiver to take all his as an insolvent. When you become insolvent, when a person become insolvent, the court will appoint a person called official receiver, and he will collect all the all the assets of that particular person, and will count that and will distribute all the amount to the interested parties. So the seller has to transfer the goods to the official receiver. And in case of agreement to sell, the seller can refuse the delivery to the official receiver, or the seller can refuse the delivery because the buyer become insolvent. So the seller can refuse the delivery of goods. Number 8. If the seller become insolvent, the buyer can claim the goods from the official receiver. If the seller become insolvent, automatically the goods will go to the official receiver because the seller is become insolvent. So thus all the goods of that particular person will go to the official receiver, and the buyer can claim that from the official receiver. But in case of agreement to sales, the buyer can claim only advance amount paid. Sometimes he would have paid some advanced amount. If there is no advance amount paid, he cannot claim anything because the seller is insolvent. But if the buyer paid some advance amount, he can claim that from the official receiver. Now, number 9. In case of contract of sales, it is create a right in rem. In the previous class, in the first beginning of the contract, we have explained what is right in rem and right in personam. What is right in rem? Right in or against a particular thing. Because in case of a sales, say I am selling the car to another person. So the car is the subject matter. So the right vested with on that particular car, the right to transfer the car is vested with the buyer and the seller. So the contract is all about this particular car. So what happens? This particular contract, there is a right in rem in that particular subject matter. But in case of agreement to sales, say both parties agree to transfer. So there is an agreement between two parties to transfer. So it becomes only right in personam. So right in or against a particular person. You can file a case against the seller, or you can file a case against the buyer. But in case of contract sales, you can file a case to transfer the or delivery of the goods and pay the price. That is why it is a right in rem. Right in rem means right in or against a particular thing. But in case of right in rem, right in or against a particular person. So in case of sales, the right will exist on the car or any subject matter of the contract. But in case of agreement to sales, you can file a case against the counterparties, either against the buyer or the seller. Now, the last point is the ownership with the buyer. In case of sales, the ownership will be vested with the buyer. That's sure. You buy a goods, you go to shop, you buy a goods, definitely it will be with your hand. But in case of sellers, agreement to sales, the ownership will be vested with sellers. So these are the very basic difference between sales and agreement to sales. So in short, we can say sales are the contract to say transfer the goods, delivery of the goods for a price on the time. When you transfer the goods on the time and you get the money or the price on the time, you can call it as a sales. But in case of agreement to sales, you pay the money in future, you take the delivery of goods in future. Maybe you may pay the money in advance, but agree to transfer the goods in future. That is the agreement to sales. Now I think all of you are clear about sales and agreement to sales. Now let us check out the difference between sales and hire purchase. Sales versus hire purchase. Dear students, you would have heard of hire purchase agreement. Hire purchase agreement is an agreement. Dear students, hire purchase versus sales. What is hire purchase basically? Let us explain first. Then it is very easy to understand what is the difference between sales and hire purchase. As a buyer, he pay the money in installment. When you pay the last installment of money, you become the owner of the goods. That is the basic idea behind the hire purchase. If you don't have the full lump sum amount to pay as a purchaser, you can opt to the hire purchase. Usually when we purchase a car or vehicles, we opt to this particular system. We may have to pay 2 lakh or 3 lakh or 5 lakh rupees at a time. So we may not have that money. So what we will do is, we will just go for the hire purchase option. We will pay the money in installment. So that agreement is not the sales agreement actually. It is just a hire purchase agreement. In that agreement, you pay the money in installment, and once the last installment is paid, the ownership is transferred to the seller, to the buyer. Now let us check out the difference between sales and hire purchase. As I said, in case of sales, the ownership is transferred. But in case of hire purchase, the ownership will transfer only the payment of the last installment. In case of number 2, in case of sales, the possession of the buyer is the owner. There is no question at all, because the buyer is the owner. But in case of hire purchase, the possession of the buyer is bailey. He is just bailed goods. In case if you default in payment of any installment, you need to, the hire seller have a right to take back your goods, and he can possess the goods also. So you are just a possessor. In case of hire purchase, the buyer is just a possessor, have a possession of the goods. He will not get the ownership until he pays the last installment. So his position is as like a bailey. Okay. Number 3, the buyer bound to pay the price. No need to say that. It is one of the element of contract of sales. He has to pay the price. Then here the hire purchase, in case of hire purchase, the person is paying the charge of hire charge. Till the last installment, he is paying the hire charge. Once he pays the last installment, that installment, the entire amount he paid will be converted into money. Now, when the buyer becomes insolvent, the seller cannot take back the goods. Say that we have already explained in the case of contract of sales. When a buyer becomes insolvent, what will automatically do is, if the price has to be paid, the money should be collected from the official receiver. Whatever money he has due should be collected from the official receiver. He cannot take back the goods. The goods will be taken by the official receiver. But in case of hire purchase, the goods insolvent, the hire seller can take back the goods, because the seller is not the hire purchaser is not the owner. The real owner is the hire seller. That is why the official receiver cannot take the goods, because the real owner is the hire seller, not the hire purchaser. So when buyer become insolvent, whatever the goods owned by the buyer will be taken. So this particular goods is not owned by this person. That is why the official receiver cannot take it. I think you understood the logic. We need to understand the things in logically. Now, if the money is paid as installment, it will be treated as price. Even though the money is paid in installment, in case of sales, Point number 5 is, even if the money paid in installment, it will be treated as price. But in case of hire purchase, the money paid in installment will be treated as hire charge, not the price. It's only hire charge till the payment of last installment. Now, it is again an executed contract. Sales is an executed contract. Hire purchase still an executory contract. Why it is called executory contract? Because the contract is not executed. This contract is not completed. The contract is not completed yet. Only the contract will complete at the payment of last installment. Say, I'll explain to you. If you take a loan from a bank for a car loan, you pay the money in installment. All the money you pay is hire charges. Then once you pay the last installment, you will become the owner. So till then, that particular contract is not executed or completed. That is why it is executory contract. Okay, so today's class is over, and tomorrow we will discuss about the contract of contract of sales in detail with all elements of contract of sales. Thank you. Wish you all the best.